put it on the website after the meeting, and the public is all on mute. They have joined us, and the commission can mute and unmute. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Andy, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, great. Well, I'm really glad you're able to come into the breakout group successfully. So what we're going to do, you can see up there on the shared screen is a template that we're going to just use to take notes. Bobby's going to be filling that out while we discuss. So you can see there's a time clock also in the upper right-hand corner, or at least that's where it is for me. We've got a little over a half an hour to discuss kind of a few issues. Really what we want to hear a little bit about is your views on the different ways of thinking about how to finance unified financing, sort of following up on the presentation from Dr. Kronik. And so we'd like to hear from you. Do you prefer some of these kinds of mechanisms over others? I do want to emphasize, I think there are great comments that were made about trying to have savings. I think that's a given that we will pursue that more. But just in terms of, given we're going to have to raise something, do you have a particular set of strategies or thoughts related to that? So I want to make sure that all of our commissioners have a chance to engage on this. But I'm wondering, not to put you on the spot, but if you'd be open to it, I'm wondering, Assemblyman Wood, if given you've actually been in the chair of actually raising revenue for various public programs, I'm wondering if you might think about talking a little bit about how you think about this issue or the different kinds of financing options.
Well, thank you. And this is really hard. Anytime you raise taxes, there's anywhere or even talk about it, there's often an outpouring of emotion and concern from a variety of different sources. So I guess when I look at the list, what I think of is I don't see how we could probably rely on just one single source. And I think it kind of needs to be a combination of things. So let me give you an example of one of the challenges we face. And every year I've been in the legislature, we've talked about a soda tax, and that has really not gotten very far, quite frankly, because of a variety of things. It tends to be more impactful on people who have lower incomes. It affects potential production of products, so that means that could potentially affect the people's livelihoods as far as changing the way things are produced, and that's just one example. Raising taxes. We've been in discussions quite a while now on additional taxes on vaping products, and there's often huge resistance to that. And so I don't say that to be discouraging, although I'll be honest, I've been discouraged because I would like to see, as a healthcare provider, I'd like to see a soda tax, because that industry contributes a lot to diabetes and obesity and so many things. But it is really, really difficult at the end of the day, and then when you start looking at the times we live in right now, any sort of increase in tax is going to be a really, really big lift. And so that's why I look at this in the big picture of whatever we do, it needs to be stable enough to be able to help and easily adjustable, so that when the increases in costs that come along, which will be inevitable, are not impalatable to people. And I think that's one of the big fundamental challenges we have.
Can I jump in here?
Sorry, who's that?
Richard.
Oh, Richard, great. Go ahead. Yes.
Let's see that I'm unmuted, right? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So California has a history of innovative taxes for healthcare. It was one of the first states, as we know, to tax tobacco, and it led to a tobacco tax that went throughout the United States and essentially worldwide. The second innovative tax that Assemblyman Wood is well aware of is the tax on millionaires, which was set aside initially for mental health spending, and it's now used for others. It's been quite effective, and it's been a big revenue source. So I would like to encourage Rick and the group to think of the next tobacco tax, the next tax on millionaires, and I'm not sure the soda tax is it for the reasons that have already been discussed, but I think this list is interesting, but is not going to get us where we need to go. So some of the other taxes that might be looked at is provider tax. This has been used in various states. Tax, for example, on hospitals. Hospitals have been making huge amounts of revenue in California, and large hospital chains with their market power are sitting on huge, when I say huge, I mean billions and billions of dollars. And we can look at other providers, and we can look at other states that use provider taxes like Minnesota and other places. Then I think everybody knows that there's much too much money made by the pharmaceutical companies. And here, the legislature can look at them and decide whether they want to put in some kind of excess profits tax. This has been used in the United States in various places, and this is to deal with their particular monopoly power and their ability to negotiate individually and not at the state level. So I think there are innovative ways of thinking about tax policy. I think of the Air Resources Board, which created the notion of cap and trade, where now it goes throughout the United States, where pollution is controlled by a cap and trade policy. We can think of ideas like that in healthcare, where healthcare systems who don't perform well, don't do well, maybe pay a price for that because they're making more money by not providing value. And we can somehow or another not only improve how they perform, but we can also get revenue from that kind of behavior, which we think is not socially optimum. So do I have an exact answer to this question of these five? For me, it would be something that, if I had to answer that, it would be some kind of a progressive tax, of course, but not on all brackets. I think the lower income brackets, I think just can't afford any more taxes at all. But I do think it's time to put our heads together and really think of some innovative tax policy and way of financing the money that we need for healthcare. And I would strongly recommend the group and the commission to set aside a particular group and focus on this, because I sense and everybody knows that what we do can't happen unless we have the revenue. So I would really make this job one. I consider this the first pass, and Rick has done a marvelous job for a political scientist to teach us in 36 minutes a whole class in healthcare finance. I think was remarkable. And I think he's going to take on Oprah Winfrey and syndicate this. But look, in many ways, he's just scratched the surface. We need to dig down and get into the people who understand taxes in California and come up with an innovative California tax that will help finance the system that we're after.
Great, thank you.
I had something, Dr. Beinman, I think is important as part of this conversation, and that is if we raise any taxes in California, right off the top, a big chunk of that goes to education. And so that goes back to one of the fundamental challenges we face in a publicly finance unified public system, is that we've got to deal with that. And that's going to take a ballot measure to protect whatever we can raise so that we don't. And I'm not saying that education is unimportant, but I'm saying if 40% of everything we raise in revenue goes to education, that means we're going to have to raise a whole lot more than we actually need to run a system, if that's where we go. And I'm watching the chat down below here, which is a little distracting, quite honestly, but I will tell you that, you are not going to be able to do this without savings across the board. Is not going to cut it. We need revenue to backfill where the employer contributions and others are coming from. We need to bear in mind that whatever tax we raise in taxes we've got another issue we're going to have to deal with along the way.
Great, thanks. How about some of the other commissioners? And, to the degree that you feel like you could, give us some argument or comments about, how among either the 5 options, and we're not trying to sort of say it's that single tax. We're just trying to get a sense of whether there are differences in these kinds of frameworks for thinking about how to raise revenue.
This is Antonia. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I think, I would be with Mr. Wood that we have to be very thoughtful about how we go about raising taxes. Right now, I think, California has been creative, but it also has put itself in a box where we raise taxes and then restrict them to certain functions. And that sort of limits the ability of the tax structure to address the totality of the needs. The issue of controlling cost in whatever system we have is going to be really important. And when you raise taxes, you have to be mindful of the fluctuation in revenues. If it's based on capital gains, if it's based on, sort of workers and the economy, and that's one of the issues with California when we're so reliant on the capital gains tax. But I think more than anything, it has to be progressive. And I think it has to be a combination. And if we look at the 3 of the 5, payroll, broad income tax, and gross receipts tax are the ones that seem to be more progressive. And I agree with the presenter is that if in fact the majority of the funds that employers pay or whoever goes to the federal government, that's not a bad thing. It's just very bad that it might not come back to California, because California right now doesn't get its fair share of the federal tax dollars or all of our tax dollars that go to the state. So, I think we need to be very careful. And whatever we recommend, we have to understand the situation and the position that these legislators are in. As an example, the soda tax. It makes so much sense, and yet we can't get it through. Why? Yes, we'll lose some jobs, but not really. It's the impact that certain interests have and the ability to influence the legislators that is an important. Whether it's cigarettes, whether it's vaping, whether it's whatever kind of tax, they're very powerful interests. So I think whatever we recommend, we're going to have to be very open-minded about the reality of the political process in which these issues are going to be considered.
I wanted to kind of talk about the issues of savings. I know, Assemblyman Wood, you were saying that was, we have to talk about increasing new tax revenue, but the discussion of savings is important because we need to figure out how much money we actually would potentially need to be redirected into a single payer system. And the savings is very important because it gives us a baseline on what we're talking about with revenue generation. But I think another thing that's really missing here is where within the current budget that we can redirect funds, and specifically where we can end current tax breaks, tax subsidies to corporations and wealthy folks, which wouldn't necessarily be a new tax. But I think there are some estimates where that ending certain tax breaks could raise $60 to $70 billion a year. And also we need to talk about redirecting money from things like policing and incarceration. We know that this is a very big demand of racial justice activists, and it would behoove us to actually look and see where we can redirect money from policing and incarceration into healthcare. With the different taxes that have been presented to us, I do think that we need to be talking about having a diversity of financing sources that and not just one payroll tax or all these different things, because we haven't been talking about wealth taxes, we haven't been talking about I think somebody mentioned provider fees, and I think reducing property tax subsidies to healthcare, to hospitals, or capturing nonprofit provider fees because they're no longer providing, uncompensated care is no longer necessary. Those are kind of things that we can look at that aren't necessarily, they will raise money, but they're not listed in the options that we were given. Again, I think we probably should look at Robert Poland's analysis where he talks about gross receipts and using tax credits to balance out some of the issues that might be raised with gross receipts and sales taxes, and giving exemptions to certain small businesses or exemptions of gross receipts under $2 billion or $2 million. I can't remember right now what Poland said, but those are really important things when we talk about these different options here, because it wouldn't, even though gross receipts really target capital intensive industries rather than labor intensive industries, and payroll taxes may be the opposite. We can address these things by the way the tax is structured.
So if I can jump in again, Andy, if that's all right.
Maybe Richard, you could wait a moment, because Richard.
Let's let all the commissioners make at least one comment first, and then we can at least, and then we can come back to you. I don't know, Anthony, if you want to comment or.
Sure. I want to second Commissioner Hernandez's kind of a progressivity. That's obviously a huge value. I think I want to take it one more step, which is security. If the point of this is to give people security that they actually have access to affordable health care, then I think we need to give people some security that if they're paying, whether they're paying in premiums or in taxes or whatever they call it, that they have some sense of where the limit is, right? I think when people are concerned about taxes, it's not just that taxes are going up, but that the feeling of, oh, somebody's I have to pay something that I don't have some control over. And so I think it's one of the reasons that I support single payer is the vision that we can tell people. Maybe we can tell them, taxes won't go up for people who are under this income level, period. Certainly low income people, maybe you can make that case for middle income. I realize that there's a tension between getting to the scale of the money we need and not having something that has some broad base. But I think that if we could say to people, you don't have to pay, you won't have to pay more than a percentage of your income in order to get quality health coverage. and that's percentages on a sliding scale and maybe cut off at some point. That I think is a really valuable selling point for getting this done. And I think that, and so I think that there's some of these designs like income tax and others that lend themselves more to that, to provide that guarantee that, you know, if the idea is giving people a guarantee, you're guaranteed that you will get coverage and you won't have to pay more than a certain percentage of your income for it on a sliding scale. And we could say whether it's 8% or 10%, whatever, or 5%, but something like that. And again, obviously scale it down. I also think, I think the notion of, you know, whatever we raise, if healthcare costs, and if we get, and I hope and I believe that we would get significant savings from a switch to this, but to the extent that healthcare costs grow, then I do think, as Dr. Wood and others have pointed out, then I would say that one of the other analyses of these things that is not included there is whether the revenue source is a declining revenue source or a growing revenue source. That's not to say that I'm against things that are declining revenue source. The soda tax is something I'm strongly in support of, and tobacco taxes, something we're strongly in support of, are hopefully declining revenue sources as, and I think that they're strong, but I do think that as we should look at where the economy is going, what the trends are, and try to see where is the wealth being accumulated now, that where there's both reasons for equity and, you know, macro issues with regard to equity, and also just where the money is in order to finance this. And so looking for sources that are where these are revenue sources that would naturally grow rather than naturally shrink.
Great, thank you. I don't know, Alice, if you want to comment, or you're mostly in a listening mode, or I just want to make sure if we've given you some space if you wanted to comment.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm mostly listening, and it's always easier to go after all of these thoughtful people have already gone. I do think the progressive principle is top and front and center, I think probably for everyone. I think stability of funding, I think, is really important. And I think that got touched upon in different ways, whether it's because we're trying to drive down utilization and therefore the funds go down, or a volatile source. I mean, just like the income tax and the volatility of the economy. Also, I mean, the main thing is making sure that we have a stable source of revenue, so it's not a counter-cyclical program, I think is really important. The way Medi-Cal is, even when it's universal. And then I think simplicity is another one. When I think about the ACA and all the patchwork of taxes and, you know, the tanning salon tax and all the various things, I think part of it would be, that would be another principle that I would want to promote. Thanks.
No, that's great. I mean, I think what we're, just to try to challenge us all to think about, and maybe Richard, you were going to weigh in on this, and I'll turn back to you in a moment, is I think you're all really doing a great job of operationalizing these principles that we tried to lay out. But to what extent do you think that some of the kinds of taxes listed here either lend themselves more to that and are therefore able to do that, or I'm also hearing, well, forget that list, let's go sideways and look at some other ones. And I think that's a very reasonable thing. And I think Dr. Kroenig tried to raise that we could perhaps stack a bunch of those together and get some money. But just wondering if there were any additional comments people would make about the degree to which, the part of why we have the A through E there was in part to sort of say, these are the heavy lifter types. And so just trying to get a sense of whether you think any of those match on to any of the criteria better than others, and whether you had any input on that. And I don't know if, Richard, that's where you were going. It sounded like you wanted to comment.
I could comment on that, Andy. This is Noah Brayali from Physicians for a National Health Program, California chapter.
Please stop. This is only for the commissioners to speak. Thank you. So, Richard, are you there? You might be on mute, Richard, or? Richard, we can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
I said I was thinking because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to just say what I was going to say or I was going to try to answer your question. You kind of changed the game on me pretty quickly there. So I'm going to say something that's going to test our friendship, Andy, a little bit. But I do think it's, it is the smoking gun in financing. It is something that the commission is going to have to tackle eventually, and you told me it would happen eventually. I simply take you on your word, but every healthcare system in the world that I'm aware of basically uses a public-private mix to cover everybody. This particular form here has only public funding. So the question is, what kind of private funding would we allow under what circumstances? That's kind of an underbelly question. Some people think we should do it with zero, but I think if we allow a public-private mix, we have some way of actually paying for this. So I'd have you think about that. And then, of course, with the upcoming election, we know what the Biden plan is, and this is the third braille, of course, of this commission for sure. And we were going to discuss it in detail later, but just to put it out there, it is the public option. And the public option is a financing mechanism. It's a way of getting other money into the system where people can opt out and buy out. And if they opt out, then we don't have to pay for them. And there are various ways. I don't want to go into the discussion of the various forms of public options across the world, but it is a financing mechanism. And I realize there are strong views on it. I realize that it causes equity problems. And I think if we identify those beforehand, there's government policy to try to deal with that. I'm not in this one way or another because I want to hear all the arguments from the rest of the commissioners and the public comments, but these are other financing options, public, private, and the public option, which I think is just not made it onto this list, quite frankly. And so I'm assuming we're going to circle back and do that later, but I just want to get it out on the table and realize that it's a hot button and it's controversial.
Great. So I don't know if others want to comment. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left before we're going back to the main group. One of the other prompts was, is there particular additional information you would like that the consulting team could bring back to the commission at another point to help you have better insights about what you'd want to know about different financing options so that you could provide advice or input on that?
I guess I did send questions to the consulting team, but I think I'll reiterate them here. We really need to have, first of all, we need to have an analysis of the savings that we could obtain from single payer. Great starting point is Robert Poland's analysis of SB 562 and the Perry Institute. My understanding is that Dr. Shao has also done some analyses of cost savings, and those are really important because we can't have a full discussion without having those numbers. And then we also need to, some of the other types of potential areas of where we can redirect current tax breaks into a single payer system, costs of policing and incarceration, how much money we're currently giving to nonprofit hospitals for charity care. That's a good place to look at how much could be generated from that. And then, just more detailed information about all the different potential taxes that are out there. Like, how much would a soda tax really generate? How much would another tobacco tax generate? How much would a wealth tax or a capital gains tax? There are a lot of different things that are out there, which, I want to see those actual numbers in this discussion. And then we should also look at, I think, the tax breaks. There's a lot of analyses out there, and I think it's important to talk about those.
Great. How about others? Yeah.
Couple of things. Well, first of all, I hope people have no illusions that raising taxes is hard, period.
Yes.
It's hard. It's very hard, okay?
Yes.
We are in an environment right now where the state is at a probably record budget deficit, and we are struggling to keep safety net programs alive. I have a proposal that's looking to advance workforce here that's in peril because we don't have the resources to keep that going. So one of the concerns that I have that isn't addressed here, and I agree with you. I believe that ultimately, a single payer system or something else that is unified, public, a hybrid, whatever it is, will lead to cost savings. But there will be required initial large investments of capital before we do that. Those savings will not come immediately. And look at our state systems right now. EDD can't function well. People are waiting for unemployment. The Medi-Cal system dropped the beneficiaries automatically because the system didn't work. Our data system at the Department of Public Health is in shambles. And so we are going to have to invest a huge amount of resources in infrastructure to put something like this together. And so my question is, where do we get the seed money to do that? Because we have to balance our budget. We can't print money like the federal government. And nowhere have I heard in any discussions where the initial funding to get this off the ground will come from. A lot of what we're talking about here is how we operate a system, but there's been no talk about where do we get the initial funding to get this off the ground. And that's missing. And I hope that at some point we really look at that.
Okay, so thank you. We have a minute and a half left. So commissioners who want to make a second comment very quickly about additional things you want information on?
Yes, and this just came up. First of all, I agree. I mean, the issue of the initial investment is a serious issue we're going to have to deal with because there's going to be, however we get there, an initial infusion of resources to get it going. But my comment or question is, could we have some sort of analysis of the impact of the Biden proposal on health if they were to win the election? What impact would that have in our thinking about the options that we have? And that's just a question.
Okay. Great. Well, I think we have 40 seconds left. So in
the last few minutes, in the last second, just I welcome the international comparisons. We can learn a lot from how they do it in other countries.
Also, I want to mention we should look at how much, what's the impact on families and their take-home pay and their disposable income.
Okay. Great. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for your input. We're going to go back to the larger group and share a little bit about some of this and have more of a chance to engage on it. See you there momentarily.